Swifters who love scrumptious snacks, let's get an image picker controller up and working in Snacktacular. So in this video lesson, we'll create a photo class. We will grab the image picker controller code that we previously wrote for the Bip the Guy app, and we will adapt it to work with Snacktacular. And we'll also crib some code from our review table view so we can easily replicate functionality in our user interface in the PhotoViewController. Let's get swifted. So we'll head to the main storyboard. We need to show who posted the photo, when it was posted, a description, photo itself. So let's build on a first generation iPhone SE to make sure that everything's going to fit. Then we'll open the library, we'll grab a label, we'll put it in the upper left hand corner. I want to make sure that there's enough space for long names, so my dummy text for this will be Benedict Cumberbatch. That's the longest name I can think of right now. And I'll set the font to System Italics, the size to 12 points. I'll click the label, Command D to duplicate. I'll drag the new label to the upper right-hand side of this view controller. I'll right-align the text. I'll replace the text with the bogus date on December 32nd, 2100. Then I'll stretch out the date a little bit more to the left, just in case I need some more room. And then I'll use the rest of the space by stretching out the posted by label all the way out to the right so that it touches the date label. Then I'll drag a selection rectangle around both of these labels. Then in the lower right-hand corner, I'll select Embed in Stack View. With the Stack View selected, I'll add constraints. Top, left, and right are all 8. Height is 15. Add 4 constraints. Looking good. Now let's add a text view. Library. Search for a text view. Drag it so that it's top left just under the posted by label. Now drag the right end so that it's close to the right margin. We'll set constraints in a bit so you don't have to be too precise. And then let's replace the Lorem Ipsum text with, how about, this describes my magnificent meal. Scroll if you'd like to see more, ... And we'll set the font to custom, Avenir Next condensed, but we'll keep the style regular and the size 17. Then with the text view selected, let's add new constraints. 0 top, that's 0 from the bottom of the stack view above it. 8 and 8 left and right sides. Height is 36. Add 4 constraints. Nice. Then let's set the background color of the text view, make sure the text view is selected, scroll down to background in the attributes, and select UI element background as the background color. And now it's time for an image view. So click library again, search for image view, drag it just below the text view, and we'll keep all the default attributes, but add constraints, top 8, left and right 0, snug to the sides of the view controller, bottom 8, add 4 constraints. And ladies and gentlemen, you've got yourself a PhotoViewController UI. So now let's add the outlets and actions. So click on PhotoViewController.swift, option click on main storyboard. We're in assistant editor mode. And let's do outlets first. So in the document outline, I'll find my label that says by Benedict Cumberbatch. I'll control drag on that, let go just below my existing IB outlets. I'll call this posted by label, click connect. Now control drag over from the date label. Why don't we call that date label? Then just below that, but outside of the stack view, is that text view. I'll control drag over, and this is going to be called description text view. And then control drag from the image view, and why don't we call this photo image view? Just take a gander to make sure that you selected the right ones. The types are all as you'd expect. Then we can close out a main storyboard, and we're ready to create our photo class. So why don't we right-click on reviews.swift. We'll select new file, select Swift file, select next. Give it that name, photo, singular, capitalize that P, click create. And now let's set up that bad boy with all the properties we need. So we'll say class, capital photo, open and close curlies. First property, var, lowercase image, UI image, and oh, look, code completion doesn't recognize UI image. How come? Because we haven't imported UI kit. So let's replace foundation with UI kit. Now it recognizes UI image. Then we've got var, description, string, var, photo user ID, string, var, photo user email, string, var, date, capital date, var, photo URL, string, var, document ID, string. Then, so much of what we need to do in the rest of the photo class is stuff that we've already done in our review.swift class. So let's head over to review.swift, and I want to highlight and copy the dictionary computed property, as well as all 3 of our initializers. Once you've copied them, return to photo.swift and paste them right below our properties. Now each of these will act as a template for what we need to do. In our dictionary computed property, we still want to do this let time interval conversion here because we've got to convert our date into a time interval before we can save it to Cloud Firestore. But below this, let's set up our return statement with our key value pair. So we'll say return, open and close brackets. In between, we'll start with our first string in between double quotes. And I'm going to copy the word description from my properties up here, paste it in between the double quotes, then say colon, paste in description again, comma, then double quotes, copy photo user ID, paste it in between the double quotes, colon, paste in photo user ID again, comma, double quotes, copy photo user email, paste it between the double quotes, colon, paste it in again, comma. And you know what I can do is I can grab this whole date, colon, time interval piece from down below. I can paste it in right after the comma. So I've got string date, colon, time interval date, comma, then double quotes, copy photo URL, paste it in, colon, photo URL. Looking good. I'll delete the old return line. Dictionary computed property, done. Now let's write our default initializer to look just like this one, but it needs to have an argument for all of the photo properties, not the ones from the review class. So above this template, we'll start our new work with init, open and close parens, open and close curlies. And as a shortcut and to prevent spelling errors, I'm going to copy the property name colon the value type from where they were defined above, just like this. So I've selected image colon UIImage, copy this, and I'm going to paste this between the parentheses below, follow this with a comma. I'll highlight and copy description colon string, just paste that below, and I'll do that for all of these variables. Just make sure that you've got a comma after the variable name colon the type. So next, highlight and copy photo user ID colon string and paste that below, comma, highlight photo user email colon string, paste that down below, comma, highlight date colon date, paste that down below, comma, highlight photo URL colon string, paste that down below, comma, highlight document ID colon string, paste that down below as well. Looking good. Then I just need to use all of my arguments to initialize my property. So I'll say self.image equals image. And you know what? I can delete this old default initializer that was from the review class. I don't need that. Then I'll continue with self.description equals description, self.photoUserID equals photoUserID, self.photoUserEmail equals photoUserEmail, self.date equals date, self.photoURL equals photoURL, and self.documentID equals documentID. Default initializer done. Now the first two lines of the convenience initializer are good the way they are, but they're reminding me that I haven't imported Firebase into my new class. And I'll need that since the auth object and its methods and properties are all part of the Firebase library. So let's head to the top, we'll add import Firebase, and then we'll head back down to the convenience initializer. Now what I need to do after these first two lines is call back to the base initializer. And this convenience initializer is the one that passes in the empty strings or the blank equivalents for the other types. So to make my life easier, I'm going to highlight this first declaration line of the base initializer above, because it's got all of the parameters that I need to call. I'll copy it, and then I'll replace everything after self dot in the last line of this first convenience initializer, pasting in what I just copied. And then we pass in empty values for each of the types in this call. So for image, I'm going to pass in UIImage open and close parentheses. That creates a blank UIImage. For description, instead of passing in type string, I pass in empty string. And oh, look, we've got another thing to change here. So the next parameter is photo user ID, but up here we're still referring to a constant review user ID. So let's make sure that we create a constant called photo user ID. And we'll do the same below, replacing review user email with photo user email. Then I'll copy photo user ID and paste it over the string type in the initializer call. And I'll copy photo user email and paste it over the string type after photo user email. And for date, I've already got capital date here, but I'll add open and close parens here. That'll create a date that's the current date and time. And that's what we want to do, because if we're creating a new blank photo object, that means we're posting a new photo and we're doing that at the current date and time. And we'll replace the photo URL string type with an empty string, and we'll do the same with document ID string. First convenience initializer, also done. Now for the convenience initializer that creates a new photo object from a dictionary, and we'll use this first line as a template. I'll grab the names of the different properties of this class and copy them, and paste them below to remind me to include them. And a reminder, the dictionary doesn't contain a UI image, so the image itself is going to be stored in Firebase storage, not in Cloud Firestore. So we'll learn how to do that in the next video. And with these properties pasted below, I'll copy the description property and paste it over the constant name title and the dictionary key title. Then I'll copy this line I've just updated,
paste it below 4 more times.
I can delete this line var description string that I was using as a template. Then I'll copy photo user ID, and on the second line, I'll paste it over to replace description as the constant name and the key string.
That'll do the same for photo user email. Now for date, I'm going to copy these 2 lines from the template below that set up the time interval from the dictionary and then uses that to create the Apple date type named date. And I'll paste that right over the description line under the let photo email line.
Then copy photo URL and paste it over the variable name description and the key description in this last line.
And I can highlight and delete everything below this up until the call to the base initializer. And I'm going to need a new call to the base initializer. So I'm going to highlight the call back to the base initializer from the convenience initializer above this, copy it. I'll paste it over the old line that was from the review class, and then I'll fix the values that were passed in for each of the attributes following the colons. Now, UI image with the open and close parens creates a blank image. That's correct. Again, we're going to fill out the UI image from Firebase storage. We'll learn how to do that in another video.
This value after description colon isn't an empty string anymore. It should be description.
Photo user ID and photo user email are correct. For date, we want to pass in lowercase date, not capital date with parens. Photo URL should have the value photo URL. And document ID can stay empty string. And just to remind you, if you look back at our other load data code that we've already written, we don't read the document ID from the dictionary. Instead, we initialize the document ID using the document ID that we get back from Cloud Firestore. And we don't need to store that because that's the same value as the document's name. So to compare, in our prior code, we used a statement that looks like this, and both do the same thing, hopefully looking at both examples underscores how the underlying code works. Let document ID equals the value for the dictionary key document ID. Well, since document ID was never loaded from Cloud Firestore because it was never saved to Cloud Firestore, this dictionary part of the statement gives back a nil because the dictionary that was saved never had the key document ID. Nil coalescing says that's a nil, so instead it assigns an empty string. Document ID is an empty string, so it passes in the empty string. But the way we wrote it previously works perfectly. It'll save us a line of code too.
So I'll just undo these changes of the code that I did, and I'll pass in an empty string instead of document ID.
And I'll delete this line above that created the unneeded document ID constant. Final initializer done. Now let's head back to PhotoViewController.Swift. Now we're going to need a photo object in here, so just under our spot declaration, we'll say var, lowercase photo, colon, upper camel case photo, exclamation point. And now how do we get this photo? Well, that happens when the user clicks the photo button. We need to code that up in the spot detail view controller, so open that file. And when the user first presses the photo button, we'll present them with an image picker controller. Remember that? You already coded one of those in the Bip the Guy app. That's how we got photos or images to Bip. So since we wrote executing code in Bip the Guy, I'm going to steal from myself. I'll open up the Bip the Guy project. I'm in the viewcontroller.swift file in that project, and I'm going to highlight the entire extension down here that deals with the image picker controller, copy it. I'll head back to spot detail view controller, and I'll paste it after the last curly as a new extension. Then we'll perform a little bit of code surgery. We'll replace the name of the class we're extending. It's no longer view controller, it's spot detail view controller. And this class also expects that we've declared and initialized an image picker controller variable of type UIImagePickerController. So let's scroll up to the top of our code, and at the end of our variables, our class properties, we'll add var ImagePickerController, lower camel case, equals UIImagePickerController, open and close parens. We've got to initialize that bad boy too. We also need to set our image picker controller's delegate, otherwise it won't be able to make calls back to this class. So in viewDidLoad, just after we set up our table view delegate and data source, we'll add ImagePickerController.delegate equals self. Now back to our extension. In our last method in the extension, the axis camera function, you should be getting an error here in show alert because there's no show alert in this project. Now we wrote this code before we added our view controller extension with the one button alert inside of it. Now, for some reason in my project, Xcode hasn't caught up yet to show me the error. Now, I can verify that show alert doesn't exist because if I control-click on show alert and try to jump to it, I get a question mark in Xcode, and that means the method doesn't exist. If we wait long enough or if we build and run, Xcode will report this as an error. But we already know what to do. We highlight show alert and replace this with self.OneButtonAlert. I'm going to delete this set of parentheses that code completion just added and use the old set of parentheses, and that's because the rest of the call inside of the parentheses is exactly the same. Now, if the user selects a photo or takes a picture using the image picker controller, we want to save that image to a photo object, so we've got to declare a photo object. Let's make this a class-wide property because not only do we record the result of the image picked in our image picker controller extension, but we also need to refer to that when we pass this photo and its image to PhotoViewController.Swift in our prepare for segue. So at the top of our code, under our spot property, we'll add var lowercase photo, colon, upper camel case photo, exclamation point.
Now back in the extension, we'll continue the surgery on our first function, that's this did finish picking media with info. This function here runs when the user has selected an image from either the camera or the image library. Again, the image picker controller sends a message to the delegate. The delegate is self, our current file, spot detail view controller. That's why this function runs when the iOS code that handles the image picker controller is done letting the user pick media. Now in here is where we should first initialize our photo object. So as the first line in this function, we'll say lowercase photo equals uppercase photo, open and close parens. Then we'll replace the two references of image view in the if-else statement, and instead we'll save it to photo.image. Then we'll modify the dismiss statement. It currently has no completion handler, but we want one because when the view controller dismisses, we're going to want to perform our segue and pass our photo over to our new photo view controller. Now I like that trailing closure format. Now it's totally okay to highlight the completion in that comma inside the parens, delete it, and then put curlies after. And in between the curlies, I'll call self.performSegue, passing in the string add photo upper camel case. That's the identifier of the segue we want to perform, and the sender will be nil. Speaking of perform segue, let's jump R up to prepare for segue, and we'll modify the case for add photo, adding the last line, destination.photo equals photo. That'll pass over our new photo object with our newly selected photo to the photo detail view controller. Now, how do we call this entire process of taking or selecting a photo? Well, we do that when we click on our photo button. So let's take a look at our method photo button pressed. And in here, we're performing a segue directly to the photo view controller. That was just for testing. But now what we want to do is we want to display an action sheet asking the user if they want to use the photo library or the camera. So let's first delete this perform segue statement. We don't want that. Now we've got no code for the action sheet in Snacktacular, but we do have code that handles this that you already wrote in, you guessed it, Bip the Guy. So let's open Bip the Guy up again, get inside of its viewcontroller.swift file. The code we want in Bip the Guy is in its photo or camera pressed function. Highlight all of the code in between the curlies here, but this is an IB action, so we don't want the function definition line or the closing curly. Now copy this code, head back to Snacktacular, and instead of pasting the code into the else clause of our IB action for photo button pressed, let's instead create a helper function. I'll add this just above all of our IB actions, so just above save button pressed. We'll call this function func camera or library alert, open and close parens, open and close curlies, paste in all of the code that we just snarfed from Bip the Guy, and then we'll head back down to photo button pressed, and we'll call camera or library alert in the else clause. Now there's a bit of a jump cut here because after I filmed the video, I cut one change I needed to make, and it's up here in our save cancel alert function. Now remember, this function shows up if the user has clicked on the review button but hasn't yet saved a new spot. So we present them with an alert that asks the user if they want to save the new spot or cancel. Now the current way this is written is we pass in a segue identifier, and if they press on the save button, then we perform the segue that has that identifier. Now that works great for add review. But if we also want to use this for add photo, if we're checking to see if we're going to save or cancel before we add a new photo, we've got to make a change. You see, we don't want to segue if we have an add photo as the segue identifier. How come? Well, we don't want to go to the photo controller until we've actually selected a photo. New reviews are written on the review table view controller, but new photos are selected from our image picker, either from the photo library or a photo taken from the camera. Then after the image has been selected, then we segue to the photo view controller. How do we fix it? Pretty easy. Let's highlight this self.perform segue line, and we'll cut it out with Command X. Then we'll place it with a line that checks to see if we're adding a new review or adding a new photo. So we'll say if segue.identifier equals, then in between double quotes, add review, upper camel case, one word, open and close curlies, and in between those curlies, paste back in our self.perform segue. Otherwise, else, open and close curlies. In between these curlies, we'll hit this if we're creating a new photo, so we'll call self.camera or library alert, open and close parens. That'll do it. Now let's scroll back to where we were in photo button pressed. Now we should have all of our code to get a photo and pass it to the photo view controller. So let's head back to the photo view controller and finish up the interface. In view did load, after we check in this guard statement to see if the spot is nil, we also want to check to see if our photo is nil. So we'll say if photo equals nil, open and close curlies. And if it's nil, we'll initialize our photo, although frankly, we should never see the inside of these curlies. Since we've already got a photo, even if we add a new photo, remember that comes in from the image picker,
but just as good practice to catch this in case the code's modified in the future and we get an unlikely error. In between the curlies, we'll add lowercase photo equals upper camel case photo, open and close parens. Then after we're sure we've passed over the data, let's go ahead and update our user interface. First, let's write the function below our view.didLoad, func update user interface, open and close parens, open and close curlies. We'll call that as the last line in view.didLoad. Then back between the curlies of update user interface, let's start to update that user interface with posted by label dot text equals, and then in between double quotes, by colon string interp photo user email. Then we'll say date label dot text equals, and in between quotes we'll say on colon string interp, and we'll put this off just a bit. We've got to put a date formatter in here and then handle formatting the date. But on the next line we'll say description text view dot text equals photo dot description, and photo image view dot image equals photo dot image. Now let us continue our practice of code theft from ourself by heading over to our review table view controller and seeing what kind of code we can grab from that to help continue the setup of our photo view controller interface. And hey, look at this, we need this date formatter right here at the top. So I'm going to highlight that, copy it, and you know what? If we scroll down, we can see lots more code we can steal in update user interface. But for now, let's head back to PhotoViewController and paste that in just before the class definition. Now we got our date formatter. It's going to show the date exactly as we want, medium date format, no time. So let's head back down to update user interface, and in between our string interp when we set our date label dot text, we'll call date formatter lower camel case dot string. Select this option here and we'll pass in as the from photo dot date. And folks, I almost forgot. Since we're going to be dealing with the camera and the photo library, do you know what we need to do? Update our privacy settings in the info.plist. So let's head over to the info.plist, and I'm going to click and expand this first column here so that I can see my different plist settings. Then move my cursor down to the last cell of the first column, click on that little plus sign, add a row just below it. I'll start to type in privacy dash camera and select camera usage description. And then for our text, I'll just double click on this last cell over here and type in Snacktacular will need access to your camera if you'd like to add a photo. Then let's go back, click on the plus in the last cell on the left-hand side, and we'll type in privacy dash L for library, and whoop, let me scroll down a little bit. It's right here, photo library usage description. And then over on the right-hand side, we'll type in Snacktacular will need access to your photo library if you'd like to add a photo. Privacy strings added in the info plist. Mission accomplished. Let's head back over to Review Table View Controller and steal more code from ourselves. And you know what? All of this formatting in Update User Interface and Review Table View Controller is a great template for what we still need to do in PhotoViewController. So I'm going to go and highlight this entire if statement in Update User Interface from ifReview.documentID all the way through the curly just before the last curly in this function. I'll copy this, then I'll head over to PhotoViewController.swift and paste this whole thing into the bottom of that file's Update User Interface function. Updates here should be pretty straightforward. Right at the start, change ifReview.documentID to ifPhoto.documentID. Then there's a call to a function, add borders to editable objects. Now we don't have that function yet, so let's write that function just below this one. We'll say func, add borders to editable objects, open and close parens, open and close curlies. And inside there's just one editable object so far that we need to add borders to. It's our photo description, so we'll say description text view dot add border. That's that nifty extension that we wrote in the earlier video. And we'll pass in a width of 0.5, radius 5.0, and color dot black. Now back up to Update User Interface. Now in the next if statement inside the else clause, it says if review.reviewSUID, but that should be if photo.photoUserID, and we'll update the comment to refer to photo and not review. And now just above the else clause, we can also delete this business about the delete button, because that refers to the red button on the Review Table View Controller, and we don't have one of those. We have the little trash can instead that's on the toolbar. Xcode will eventually show me that there's an error because this delete button doesn't exist. So let's delete this line that sets is hidden to false for the delete button that doesn't exist, and instead we'll replace it with code to show the toolbar, because that's where our little trash can button is. And we learned how to do that in an earlier video. We just say self.navigation controller ? And the method is set toolbar hidden. Select that, and we'll pass in false for hidden. That will make sure that it is being shown and not hidden.
and true for animated. Now, also important and related to this, if we are showing a toolbar, then it's always going to be showing for all of the view controllers in the navigation controller stack, unless we explicitly hide it. Now, we've already dealt with a situation like this when we forced the toolbar to show in the view will appear function of our spot list view controller, and that was so that we were always showing our toolbar with the segmented control, the one with the sort buttons. Well, we've got a similar situation here, but it's a bit more nuanced, because in spot detail view controller, sometimes we want to show the toolbar. That's when the spot hasn't been saved, and sometimes we don't. That's because if a spot has been saved, you shouldn't be able to use the find location button to change the location. So how do we fix that? Well, first, let's highlight this code that shows the toolbar. We're going to use this code, but we're going to set its opposite value and copy it. And we'll use this in spot detail view controller. So let's head over there now, and let's find the view will appear function. We will see if the spot is still new and if it has not yet been saved. And if that is the case, then we want to show the toolbar because the toolbar has the find location button and you can still change the spot's name and location before you save it. So to do this, inside of view will appear, we're going to say if spot.documentID does not equal empty string, open and close curlies, we'll paste in that set toolbar hidden code that we just copied. But that first parameter is false. We don't want that. We'll change it to true. Now let's head back to PhotoViewController and let's keep working through these updates. So in this else clause here, we need to change the comment to refer to photo, not review. Now in posted by label.text, the string interp should refer to photo.photo user email, not review.review user email. We can highlight and delete the entire for loop. That was for star buttons, and we don't have any of those in our photo view controller. And we also don't have any text fields, so I'm going to delete these two lines here that refer to review title field. And there's another one down below, so I'll highlight and delete this one that set the review title field background to white. But we do have a text view here, so I'm just going to change the review text field lines so that they refer to description text view in these last two lines of code. And whoops, it looks like there's one more comment at the start of the if statement here. We'll just switch review to photo. And when you reuse code from yourself, it's always a good idea to double check to see if you have any old code referencing things that don't exist. Now, Xcode would catch this during compilation, and you'd get errors that prevented the code from building and running, but that wouldn't pick up any comments. And again, it's nice to be consistent with those. So just to double check, I'm going to press Command F to bring up the Find dialog box up top here. I'm going to type in the word review, press enter. Now I paused the video here so you can see this little arrow that shows up with a line at the bottom of the arrow. That says that Find has searched the entire document, arrived at the end, so we're looking good. So I'll click Done up here to hide the Find box. If the word were any place in this code, then we'd see it highlighted. It would be in yellow on my Xcode setup. That's the default formatting. And I suppose we should really click in front of the first character in this document before running the find, just so that we can make sure that we're searching from the very top of the document through the bottom. No need to redo the search though, we're looking good. Now there's one more thing we need to change. Again, for some reason my Xcode isn't showing the errors that it should be. I'm not sure why, but this statement here where we check to see if the photo user ID is the same as the current user's user ID, that's Firebase code. And we know that because if I highlight this code, I backspace over it, and then I try to type it again, we can see that code completion isn't recognizing that first auth class that I'm trying to type in. So I'll just undo the deletion here so that my code remains. That code is actually written properly. But to prevent any errors, let's head to the top of this code. We'll import Firebase. And at long last, we are ready to build and run and test this out. No errors. Hammer time. Here's our app. I'm going to click on Island Creek, and I'm going to click on the photo button. I'm going to select the photo library since the simulator doesn't have a working camera and iOS takes over. It shows the image picker controller. This is all Apple's code at work. Nice. Now the simulator just has a bunch of nature pics. They're nice, but they're not very good for a restaurant app. You can actually load up your own pictures in your simulator if you'd like. So I've got a folder here with a bunch of dummy photos of food. You can grab your own from the internet. Just note that once you've got your images on your desktop, and again, these can be JPEGs or PNGs, you can simply select them all and then just drag them over into your simulator and release. And this is going to load all of those photos into this version of the simulator. If you've never done this before, this is a new simulator. You might get the little what's new message. If you do, just click on continue. Then I'm going to click in the upper left-hand corner. That arrow brings me back to Snacktacular, and I'll select all photos. Now, just a word of warning, sometimes the simulator gets quirky and doesn't seem to detect touches on photos. I'm clicking on the lobster roll. That seems to be what's happening here. It seems if you press the back button or cancel or start over, the simulator will usually start to behave itself.
So now that I clicked back and I'm looking back at the photos again, I'm going to once again click on my favorite, the lobster roll. And hey, the lobster roll is loaded into the PhotoViewController. Nice! Now, we're not showing the trash can toolbar yet because we haven't saved this photo, and saving images is something we're going to learn in the next video, but you can cancel out of this. You can try adding more photos. Again, you're not going to be able to save, but the UI looks great, and hopefully you've learned a few techniques and you've solidified your existing knowledge as you cribbed code from yourself. So way to go, Swifter. In the next video, we'll save those images. Keep at it!